Hey guys, welcome back. This video is all about my 1990s Boss XT-2 Xtortion pedal. Great sounding pedal. They brought it out in about 96, I think, but by 98 Boss had 86'd it, and by all accounts it's just because it didn't really sell very well. So they're kind of relatively rare, having only a sort of a 2-year or maybe slightly less production run, but if you're patient enough you can still find them for sale. I bought this one pretty cheaply because it's clearly quite dinged up. It's missing a lot of paint here, and I'm planning to do something about that later on in the video. But I think the main reason it didn't sell was probably to do with these two tone controls. There's one labeled Punch and there's one labeled Contour, and I think the Punch control to me sounds very much like some kind of mid boost. Quite like the Punch control. It really makes the distortion kind of richer. But the Contour control, I've got no idea. In fact, I have always just left it at 12 o'clock where I think it sounds the best. In this video, I really want to get to the bottom of exactly what those controls do. So what I did was I looked up the manual online. You can find it online. There's a PDF kicking around somewhere, and it didn't really help much, to be honest. It says here the punch knob adds punch to the distortion. Turning it clockwise gives the sound more punch. So yeah, not very helpful. Contour control, rotating it clockwise will make the sound milder. Not sure about that. Yeah. Just kind of sounds a bit boxy to me. Sounds like some kind of... Yeah, it sounds like some kind of upper mid cut or maybe low treble sort of cut. Not so keen on that sound. Rotating it counterclockwise will make the sound sharper and heavier. Well, it certainly makes it a bit quieter. Turn the volume up. Sort of makes it sound a bit smoother, but it just sounds a bit dead. Sounds like a treble cut, like a low pass filter. So, yeah. I did find a schematic online. This particular one is all over the web. I couldn't find a genuine original Boss service manual schematic. So if you happen to have one of those, let me know. If you have a link to one, let me know in the comments. And the first thing I've noticed actually is that the punch control is a filter that's before the distortion section, and the contour is a filter that's after the clipping section. So maybe Boss should have written that information in the manual. I'd like to do something more with the contour control. It's a shame just to leave it in the middle all the time. So I think the first thing I'll do is check this schematic, because like I say, it's not an official Boss one, so I'll go through my pedal and check all the parts and stuff. But I think I'll actually simulate these two filters and just find out exactly what's going on. So I've spent a bit of time with this schematic that I found online. It's actually pretty accurate, but it is missing one or two bits and pieces. So this is my edited version, and I'll put this up as a PDF on my website if anyone's interested. The circuit is, well, I guess at the heart of the circuit is this section here, and this is the distortion section or the clipping section, and you've got a big old gain stage around this op amp, the distortion knob itself, rolls the gain from about 12 or 13 dB all the way up to, I think it was about 40 dB or maybe more. So it's got a lot of gain, and that drives these two diodes into clipping. Notice that they're opposed and just wired to earth like this. This is what's known as hard clipping, or in the pedal world, I guess. In the case of the XT2, the diodes are LEDs. They're actually the same LED that they use as a status light. Where this pedal gets kind of interesting, I think, is the filtering before and after the clipping section. And before, of course, we have our punch control. This is kind of, well, it's kind of like a 3-band EQ in a sort of strange way. We've got 3 bandpass filters. This guy here, which is 3 kilohertz. We've got this guy here, which was 600 hertz from memory, and this one here, which is 1200 hertz. The 3K bandpass filter is hardwired to the op amp, and you notice it's not connected to the wiper of the punch control. So this guy is permanently cranked. So you've basically got a big old treble boost right up front at 3 kilohertz. And you can kind of hear that in the pedal. I'll start with a punch all the way down. If I start with the gain really low, as I crank the gain, just when it starts clipping, you can hear that it's the treble that's clipping first. So that's because of that big old treble boost, again, that you can't really control. The other 2 filters are connected to the punch control. We've got 600 and 1200. 600 is obviously right in the middle of the mids, I guess you'd say, and 1200 is, I guess, high mids or low treble. And as you turn the punch control up, these 2 bands get boosted. But it's not simple, and they don't get boosted the same way. And that's because the 600 band has a much higher Q. It's a really peaky, narrow band filter. So as the punch control gets up to halfway, the mids getting more fuzzy and richer. But then beyond halfway, the 600 hertz narrow band really gets dimed, I guess you'd say. And you get those beautiful overtones. I guess Boss here are really going for that that sound you get when you've got a cocked wah pedal up front of some kind of fuzz pedal. So I really like the punch control, and I'm not going to mess with it. I think the interesting part of the pedal is what happens after the distortion section. There's kind of 4 filters going on here. Straight after, we've got this section here, and again we've got 2 bandpass filters. This one is at 4K, right in the treble, a little bit higher than the treble boost up front, but higher in frequency, I should say. But you've got a big old treble boost, and we've also got a fairly subtle bass boost. I think this is at 40 hertz or something like that. And again, there's no control on these, they're just dimed. They're connected straight to the op amp. Having a treble boost up front and another treble boost after the distortion, it's really where that metal sound comes from, you know. It's where you really get that real scratchy, sort of fizzy, kind of scratchy treble sound. And it sounds great. The contour control is this guy here, and again you've kind of got 2 filters. Notice that the wiper of the contour control is connected to earth, so when you turn it clockwise, this cap here is earthed, and that brings this filter into play. And this is a band reject filter, or basically a notch filter. And yeah, that's kind of what my ears were hearing there. It's somewhere between 850 and 900 hertz from memory. And when you turn the contour control anti-clockwise, then this 1K resistor is earthed. Essentially, we've got a low-pass filter here with 4K7 resistor and these caps going to earth. But it's essentially why the mids and treble kind of get rolled off by quite a long way. And it's also why the volume seems to drop, because so much of that mid-range is being cut by this filter. And again, not real keen on that filter. So I think what I'm going to do is actually rework this mid-cut idea. I think it's really interesting to have a mid-boost before your distortion and a mid-cut after the distortion. I think I can sort of play those two controls off one another. I think Boss, we're on the right track here, but 900 Hertz I think is just too high for it. So I want to rework this so that it's lower in frequency, maybe down 400 or 500 Hertz or something like that. Okay, I think I have a plan. First thing I'm going to do is remove this 1K resistor R25, and that means that the pot will only control the notch filter, but I want the low pass filter to stay kind of where it was with the original control set in the middle. So to do that, I need to find a resistor that's about half of the pot's value. I don't have any 51K resistors, but a 47K will be just fine. So now the pot only controls the notch filter, but a 100K linear pot is not really going to do that with a very even sweep, so I'm going to swap it for a 50K audio taper pot. So then I want to drop the center frequency from 900 Hertz down to 600 Hertz, and the quickest way to do that is to swap out this 22 nanofarad cap for a 47 nanofarad cap. And to make the pot kind of work more intuitively, I'm going to connect the 47 nanofarad cap to the other side of it. If we look at some sims, this is a sim of all of the filtering that is in the original pedal that's after the distortion, and you can see this little bass boost here down all the way down at 40 Hertz. It's well below the guitar range. It's a strange thing. And then this pretty sizable treble boost at 4K. After I've modded the pedal, or at least tried this mod idea, this is what it's going to look like with the control fully clockwise. And then as I wind it down anti-clockwise, I'll get a mid-cut. That's halfway, and that's all the way down. And you can see that's a good notch at 600 Hertz. Interestingly, if I go back to the original wiring, this is what the original contour control looks like when the notch filter is fully dimed. So here it is at around about 900 Hertz or thereabouts. But look at this huge treble cut that we're getting. So the other advantage of this mod, I think, is going to be that it doesn't mess with the treble. It just purely works on the mids. But until I wire it up, I won't really know how it sounds. So that's the next step. Yeah, well, that works pretty well. Works exactly as expected, which is always a relief. Yeah, it's cool. I can cut the mids without really affecting the treble too much, which is exactly what I was going for. Weirdly enough, I think it kind of comes into its own with lower punch and drive settings. I think. I guess the pedal is kind of more. It's a bit gnarlier. I can just sort of tame those mids and give it a slightly smoother sound. But either way, it's a much more useful control, I think, than what was in there originally. As I mentioned in the past, if you're new to desoldering parts, definitely get a good desolder pump. This is an Edson solder pult. There's also a Goot brand one in the JCar catalogue, and these work really well. I use this for board work. I do have one of these little cheap sort of thumb pumps, but I don't use that on circuit boards. I actually use that with guitar wiring for other stuff. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video, but spend the bucks and get a good desoldering pump and get some practice in. Go and find some old broken TVs or whatever your neighbours are throwing out, and get the boards out and practice desoldering the through-hole parts. The old school single-layered phenolic circuit boards in these pedals from the 80s and 90s, you can actually damage them pretty easily with too much heat, or if you have to go back and forth too many times to get a part out. So get yourself some practice if you're new to this. The mod itself is pretty straightforward, just removing the 1K resistor and swapping out the pot is pretty easy. I did need a bit of creativity, I guess, when it came to installing the 47K resistor. There was no real convenient place on the board or no simple way to mod the board to install that, so I ended up pulling the original C17 10 nanofarad cap and actually soldering the resistor directly to it. The trick is to just put a single twist of the resistor wire around the top of the cap leg on both sides, a little dab of solder, nip the excess off, and then you can put both parts back into the original spot that the cap came from. As for the 47 nanofarad cap, getting that across to the other side of the pot was pretty straightforward. I just used the solder pad that was vacated by the 1K resistor, and then you want to put a little bit of heat shrink or something on the other leg that you run across the board back to the original spot, and that's just to avoid its shorting on other parts. So next I want to redo the design on this little control plate. That's why I've left it off, and I've also not pressed these knobs all the way home. They're super tight. They were very difficult to remove. As far as I know, they're the original knobs on the pedal, so I don't know why they are so tight. One little tip is to use some non-slip matting. This is just an offcut from the stuff I use on my bench here, and that'll help you grip the knobs when they're really tight and get them off. A couple of these were so tight that I had to kind of lever them off with a couple of small slot screwdrivers. You really need to use two and lever them from both sides if you do that. If you try and just do it from one side, you'll almost certainly break the knob, or even worse, break the pot. As for this scratched up control plate, well, I guess I could just send it out somewhere and have it reprinted. These days, they don't use silk screening or anything like that, sort of old school technology. It's all done with specialised laser printers and UV cured ink and everything. I don't know of a place locally that does it. I'd have to phone around, I guess. But I think I'll just have a go at making a decal. If I screw it up, it doesn't really matter because I'll apply it to the back and see how it goes. This is symmetrical after all. Either way, I'm going to have to reproduce this original design on here, and looking at this manual I downloaded has given me a bit of an idea. So there's my decal, it's all ready to go. To create this, first I scanned my original control plate, and then my idea was to use the image from the manual. So I actually took a screen capture of that and then dragged it into Photoshop and adjusted its sizing and alignment. Weirdly enough, it didn't actually match the printing, or what's left of the printing, on my original control plate. So I did have to tweak the spacing of some of the lettering and even the position of some of the words and stuff. I was originally hoping that that's all I'd need to do. Just use that original image from the manual with a few tweaks, invert it, and then use that as my decal. But zooming in on it, I realized that the lettering was kind of fuzzy around the edges and so on, so I ended up reproducing the text. Turns out that the font is almost exactly the same as Arial, which made life a bit easier. Next, I just had to create the little dots for min and max, and I also created a circle over each of the 4 potholes. That way I can slide it into place properly. And once I was happy with that, I just had to invert the image, print it onto some decal paper. With the bubble jet, you have to wait for about an hour or so for the ink to dry, and then I've laid up a couple of coats of clear lacquer over the top. And then left it overnight. So I'm pretty much ready to go, but I do have to do a little prep on this aluminium control plate. The back has a few marks on it and so on, so I'm going to give it a little rub with 1500 grit wet and dry. It also needs its edges deburring. They're quite sharp. I've never actually slid a decal onto bare aluminium, so I'm not entirely sure it's going to work. It also goes all the way to the edges. In fact, I've made it slightly oversized so I can trim it back later on. Again, I've never done that before, so wish me luck, we'll see how we go. So once the decal had dried, I very carefully trimmed the edges off with a scalpel. Then I laid up 2 or 3 good wet coats of clear gloss, but it just looked a bit too shiny. It was just too glossy. It didn't really match a 25-year-old pedal that already has a few scratches on it. Plus there was a couple of little specks of dust in the finish, so I very carefully sanded it with some 1500 grit wet and dry, then shot a final coat of, well, the same stuff but in semi-gloss, and yeah, I think it looks great. I reckon it really suits the pedal, and I think for a DIY job it's just about as close as the original as I think you're going to get. I know this pedal isn't really everyone's cup of tea, but I do really like it. I really like the punch control. I much prefer the contour control now that I've modded it. And I think the actual sound of the pedal's great, but the overall voicing of the pedal, I think it's still a little bit toppy for me, a little bit too strong in the treble and lacking a bit of bass. But I have come up with a couple of very simple mods, one to tame that treble peak and another one to beef up the bass slightly. But I've kind of run out of time for those in this video, so keep an eye out for another video on this pedal in the very near future. So for now, I'm going to say thanks for watching. I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.